this on? Can you hear it? Well, Joe said he wanted to give some people an opportunity who have the gift of preaching to use their gift. I don't know if that's me. I think I've heard a lot of people claim they had the gift of preaching, but I didn't have the gift of listening. So I pray that you all have the gift of listening. Am I right? You know, and especially since I have the two smartest people in the world sitting here with Joe and Al. You know, they're on their theology and studying the great things God, Brian, and I are over here in our Jesus coloring books, you know, trying to keep up, you know. So we're going to look at, we've been looking at the Gospel of Luke. And I know what you're thinking already is that, oh, man, when you get to church and you realize the pastor isn't preaching that day, you're kind of like, oh, I could have slept in. I could have went to IHOP. I could have done whatever. But, you know, I apologize, but you're stuck with me today. My wife said, don't be nervous. Don't be nervous. You're only explaining the Bible. It's not like you're trying to explain the Iowa caucus because nobody understands that at all. And she said, besides, nobody's going to be listening to you anyways. So she's ever the encourager. So we've been looking at the 11 weird things that Jesus did. Okay, so by way of review, we've learned a few things. We've learned that Pastor Joe thinks he's a heretic. Okay? We've also learned that he wants to be a llama. So each week I mess with Joe and I take quotes out of context, I put them on Facebook, and I just have fun with that. But I do listen to what he says. So as we do go back and review, in the first week we looked at Jesus gets baptized. And I asked Joe, can you sum up what that was in one little sentence, your whole sermon? It pretty much is that Jesus was identifying with God as he launched his ministry, and he was building on the old and heading to the new. So because we always think that's kind of weird that Jesus got baptized. Why did he have to get baptized? Well, that's kind of what it symbolizes. The next week, Pastor Joe talked about Jesus gets tempted. And he really focused on Jesus' impeccability, right? It says he was incapable of sin or wrongdoing. It wasn't that he was tempted and didn't sin. He was incapable of sinning. A.W. Pink said the last Adam differed from the first Adam in his impeccability. Christ was not only able to overcome temptation, but he was unable to be overcome by it, necessarily so, the Almighty. And then Pastor Joe tied that in with Hebrews, because what good is this guy who lived an impeccable life if he can't relate to it, right? And he tied that in with Hebrews 14. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with us in our weakness, but one who is in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace, and this is where it is, that we may receive mercy and find grace in time of need, right? Amen. I mean, that, wow. How many times have you run to that, right? I'm seeing Ryan nod his head. I have. Week 3, Josh talked to us, and it was Jesus calling his disciples. Or you can say, these guys? I mean, if you think about it, when Jesus called his disciples, he called ordinary dudes, right? He called, they were regular. They ate at Chick-fil-A just like every good Christian is, right? Except on Sundays. They had to chew on pieces of straw or something. They were guys from the community, right? They worked in the automotive business as a consultant, or they worked in rental or stuff, or, they even taught at Bible college, but he didn't start there. So he just picked ordinary guys like us. And I think we can relate to some of these guys. I mean, like Peter was always putting his foot in his mouth, and I can relate to that. And a lot of you are going, yeah. I know you well enough. I can see that can happen. So we do that. So week 4, we see Jesus says, what about wealth? Now this can kind of hit sometimes, because being in the 1%, the wealthiest people on earth, just because you're in America makes you feel kind of bad about having stuff sometimes. But, he talked about the prosperity gospel, and I don't remember if he said this or if this is just from his blog that I found. But he talked about the guys that were joking on SNL, right, about trying to breed little camels to fit through the needle, the rich guys. or we can just make bigger needles. But the prosperity gospel is even worse than you realize. How about you realize that God is promising eternal life that's literally infinitely better than anything we could want on earth? Trading what you cannot keep to gain what you cannot lose is pretty reasonable. So when we look at it that way, which brings us to week 5. Jesus got transfigured. Keeping with he did what? What? I stole it. Like everything in preaching, if it's new, it ain't true, and if it's true, it ain't new. So, keeping with what Dr. Cox taught us in preaching class, God gave you eyes to plagiarize. So that's what preaching is, right? So if you would, let's look at the Transfiguration passage in Luke. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, he took with him Peter and John and James and went up to the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, 2 men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. And as the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Not knowing what he said, as he was saying these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him." And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent and told no one in those days anything of what they had seen. Okay, so what's that mean? What led up to this event? If we go back, if we look at the beginning of Luke 9, not the whole book, we see that Jesus sent out his 12 disciples, right? He sent them out with power to go out healing, to preach the gospel and talk to people, to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal. And because of this, word got back to Herod that this stuff was going on. So he was curious, like, what's going on here? Who is this? And reports, some people told him, well, it's John the Baptist. He says, no, I cut his head off. It can't be him. What else you got? So everybody has a theory about what's going on. Then the feeding of the 5,000. Then they come up, go. So let's pick it up at verse 18. So now it happened that he was praying alone. The disciples were with him, and he asked, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" We see quite a bit in Scripture, Jesus and the disciples would, especially after a long thing of ministry, they'd take off into the mountains or in the wilderness or somewhere, and they'd get off by themselves to rest and recuperate, and they'd all be together, and Jesus would go off and pray. And so when he thought the time was right, he came up and said, "Who do the crowds say I am?" Now, everyone agreed that Jesus was someone special. And everyone had his own theory as to why. Some said that it was John the Baptist back from the dead, like they were telling Herod. Others, an ancient prophet returning to announce the revival of Israel, right? And the theories were tossed out there, but only a very few of them thought of Jesus as the Hebrew Messiah. And so they answered, John the Baptist. But others say Elijah. And others, one of the prophets of old is risen. Now, I'm pretty sure Jesus knew what they were going to answer at this point. So eventually, Jesus thought that the time was right, and his disciples had enough evidence, so he put them on the spot. His friends would now have to make a decision. So he looked at them and said, yeah. But who do you say I am? Now, at this point, he's saying, listen, I know what everybody's saying. Who do you say I am? Or in the South, who y'all say I am? Or in the North, who do you guys say I am? Right? However you want to say it, he's putting it back onto you. Who do you say I am? Now imagine that some of the guys started getting a little little bit nervous, probably start looking at the ground, like, maybe they start looking at each other, like, start looking at their phones, or kind of like when Pastor Al asks a question in Bible study and everybody's like, Joe, you got an answer? Right? That was last week anyways. You were like, They probably squirmed a little bit before Peter blurted it out like he always does, doesn't he? He says, you are the Christ, the Messiah. Now, the word Christ or Messiah, both the same word. Christ is the Greek, comes from the Greek, Messiah from the Hebrew, means anointed one. So, well, in the ancient Near Eastern cultures, a person would participate in a ceremony in which a small amount of oil was poured over the head for a special recognition. Okay, it could be for valor on the battlefield or conquering a national enemy, probably. But most often, it was the way a leader was commissioned. And in Israel, to be the Lord's anointed, what did it mean? To be the king. It means you be the king. Because for centuries now, from that they knew, hopeful Jews looked for a very special king. They were looking for an ultimate Messiah, right? They were looking for the promised one. The prophets of old would supersede all of Israel's past anointed ones. Greater than David, greater than Solomon, all these anointed kings. He's going to be greater than all of them. He would usher in a new way of relating to God, and he would usher an unprecedented time of peace and prosperity, and he would rule from Israel. That's what they were looking for. If you look at Psalm 45, 6 and 7, it says, your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy. And in Daniel 2:44, he says, and in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. So many look at these as prophecies of the anointed one coming. So that's what they're looking for. The person would not merely be a Christ, he would be the Christ. Peter was saying that Jesus was indeed the long-awaited ultimate king of Israel, but he didn't stop there. He said, you are the Christ, and in Matthew it says, the Son of the living God. We hear this a lot, but what does it mean? People try to say, well, Jesus never claimed to be God. Yes, he did. When you look at all the references, they knew exactly what he was saying. And Peter's saying, you're the Son of the living God, because in the Hebrew culture, to be a son was to share all the Father's qualities in common and to inherit the Father's privileges and power. No one dared call himself a son of God or he'd be guilty of blasphemy. So when Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, that's why they wanted to kill him for blasphemy. Only someone having God's divine qualities and powers and possessing God's ruling authority could call himself the Son of God. It's a big statement. Peter gave this title to Jesus. It meant that Jesus was a worthy object of worship. Just like the God the faithful Jews had worshipped in the temples for centuries. This wasn't just a little thing saying, yeah, you're God, you're the Christ, you're the Messiah. He's saying way more than that. And Jesus said, yes, that's right. He didn't shy away from that. He said, you did not come to know this through human discovery, but through revelation from God the Father, Matthew tells us. But what exactly Messiah meant, I don't think they fully understood. So Jesus gave them a strict charge and commanded them to tell this to no one. This was a strict order because the Jews detested their subjection to the Romans. The Romans did not treat them well. That's a light way of putting it. And they longed for deliverance, right? They were ready to follow almost anyone who claimed to be a Messiah. In fact, they had. There had been little revolts, little uprisings throughout the years of people following somebody who claimed to be the Messiah or a Messiah just to get out of the subjection they were under. So why did he tell them, tell this to no one? Why wouldn't you want to scream this? This is God. This is the Messiah, the deliverer. Why? Well, because had Jesus been widely hailed as a Messiah at that time, people would have understood it as a political and a military claim. They would have completely missed all that Jesus was trying to teach them. I never understood that when I was, reading it when I was younger and even coming into Bible college. Why would they not want to tell anybody this? Well, it makes a little bit of sense, doesn't it? Because it would be misunderstood. They were looking for that deliverer. Somebody do it now. So Jesus takes it a little bit further and he foretells his death. He's saying, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Jesus left little doubt that being Messiah meant death on a cross. But that's not the whole story, is it, in that verse? He says, on the third day, the Son of Man will be raised. So he was saying that the resurrection is just as certain as the crucifixion. Amen? Just as certain. The Matthew account, we see Peter pull Jesus aside and said, surely you can't be the one. You're not going to die. That's crazy. You're the king. You're the Messiah. And he says, get behind me, Satan. Because you're not looking at this from God's perspective. You're looking at it from man's perspective. Keep quiet. Again, Peter puts his foot in his mouth, doesn't he? He doesn't understand. So then Jesus comes in and follows up with his announcement of a cross with a reference to another cross, the one to be carried by his followers. This is where the toes get stepped on, right? I see Brian talk about this all the time on the Facebook, about what it means to daily die to yourself and to give up and follow the cross. Jesus said this. And he said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. What's that mean? To take up your cross. Self-denial, right? Not be self-centered. There's nothing self-indulgent about being a Christian. There's just not. Many times we act like it, but it doesn't fit, doesn't jive, to use Pastor Al's vernacular. I'm just, how old are you? Joe made you look to be like Moses old or something. But anyway, sorry. Man, Joe. Oh, anyway, sorry. Self-denial. See, the Jesus was talking about a literal cross for himself, but the one by the followers was not a literal cross necessarily, or an atoning cross, but it was and is very real. See, the disciples had probably seen a man from their village taken off with a little band of soldiers and taking up his cross and going away with these Roman soldiers. When they saw that, they knew that was a one-way trip. That guy wasn't coming back. So taking up the cross meant a lot to them. They understood what was happening there. They knew that was the utmost in self-denial, taking up your cross. And then Luke tells us that it's not something we can do just once and get it out of the way. It says, take up the cross daily and follow me. In 1 Corinthians, or 1 Corinthians if you prefer, 15:31. Paul says, I die to self daily. Daily he dies to self. It's not a once and done. But I don't have time to do that. Saw a theme with Maury Povich says, you say you don't have time to read your Bible. Your Netflix account browsing history says otherwise. So, ouch. Die daily. So, says Jesus, who's still following me? Right? Take up your cross. You could be killed. Who's coming? You know, here's the paradox in there. He says, "For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels." So whoever would save, or rather wills to save his life, is kind of how it should read. It points to the attitude of one who puts emphasis on getting the best out of life for himself. Been there. I've been there. Brian's been there. We've heard that. I'm sure many of you have talked to some of you. We've all had that focus. What's best for me? Let's go. That way my life means certain loss. But the one who actually loses his life, not wills to lose on this time, but actually loses his life, will save it. Right? I'm going to go back to that quote we talked about. How about you realize that God is promising you eternal life that's literally infinitely better than anything we could want on earth? Trading what you cannot keep to gain what you cannot lose is pretty reasonable, isn't it? You seeing a theme coming through Luke? Jesus is talking about, he's telling the disciples, leave everything, follow me, and they did. Then he tells you it's harder, it's easier to put a camel through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to come into heaven. And now he's saying we have to give up everything. Lose your life. Don't be focused on you. Follow me. William Barclay said it this way. He said, the Christian must realize he is given life, not to keep it for himself, but to spend it for others. Not to husband its flame, but to burn himself out for Christ and for men. That's pretty tough. I hate hearing people say, oh, I'm just getting burnt out in ministry. Good! Right? I know there's times when you got to get away to recharge. Jesus did that. And I think it's a biblical thing for a pastor to take a sabbatical and recharge. But if you're getting burnt out on ministry, you're relying on yourself and you're not relying on God, per se. I don't mean we'll get tired, because we do. We do get tired in this walk. So Jesus reinforces this with the reference to eternal issues. To be ashamed of Jesus now, he says, is to be assured that he will be ashamed of us when he returns in glory. What's that mean? Quite simply, if you reject Jesus here, he's going to reject you. If you don't trust in Jesus now, it's too late when he returns in all of his glory. I don't think you're going to, I'm not going to get into it. A time where everybody get a second chance, something. No. If you reject him now, he's going to reject you then. But I tell you truly, another one of these weird statements. I tell you truly, there's some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God. What's that about? Yeah, it's pretty simple, really. There's a whole bunch of theories, and you can read a book, and they take up 2 whole pages talking about this and this and this and this. And really what it's saying is, it's Peter, James, and John. They're going to come up with me on the Mount of Transfiguration. They're going to see all this. It's the very next verse. So let's look at it. Now, about 8 days later, after these sayings, he took with him Peter, John, and James, and went up to the mountain to pray. And he was praying. As he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, 2 men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep, but when they came fully awake, they saw him in his glory and 2 men standing with him. So Peter says, wakes up. He says, Master, it's good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you and one for Moses, one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. Okay. Now, this may have been probably the greatest Bible conference ever held on earth. Okay? You've got Jesus, Moses, Elijah, right? You have Moses, the giver of the law of God, right there, holding his tablets. I'm sure they recognized him from their profiles on Facebook. So they knew who they're looking at because he said it. Let me make a tent for each one of you. Then you've got Elijah there who represents all the prophets. And you have Jesus who came to fulfill the law and the prophets. You had the greatest topic ever discussed at a Bible conference, the Exodus or the departure of Jesus, his death. And that he would accomplish it at Jerusalem. Moses had led Israel out of bondage to Egypt. Pretty big deal, right? Pretty big deal. Elijah delivered them from bondage to false gods. Very big deal. Now you have Jesus there, who would die to set a sinful world free from bondage to sin and death. Amen? And all the while this is going on, Peter, James, John, they're sleeping. Then they wake up and Peter looks at him and says, let's go camping. I don't think that's what he meant, fella. All right, my best Jim Gaffigan. I don't think that's what he meant at all. In fairness to Peter, okay, he wasn't saying that. He was likely referring to the Feast of Booths. You guys know what that is? Of course you do. You all studied it, right? No? Okay. The Feast of Booths was a long feast, an ingathering that associated with the coming kingdom. So when he saw Jesus in all of his glory, he saw the kingdom that they talked about, that they celebrated, that they learned about in this Feast of Booths. So he wanted to set that up. Luke's commentary says Peter didn't know what he was saying. It's not that he was just uttering and just like blah, 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 said something without thinking. Well, kind of did, but he didn't misunderstand the kingdom setting because he figured there's Jesus in all his glory. There's Elijah and there's Moses. This is the kingdom. Let's celebrate. Let's set up the tabernacle. The kingdom's here. He was correct about that. The problem was he forgot about Jesus' prediction of suffering. He was saying, oh, we get to skip that part. He forgot all about it. So as he was saying these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, this is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him. You look back to verse 20, what did Peter say? You are the Christ. You are God. And now you have, in verse 35, Peter is answered decisively by God himself. Yeah, that's right. Just like at Jesus' baptism, right? If we look back at that, we looked at that. A voice spoke to those witnessing the event and confirmed who Jesus was. He said, this is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him. It wasn't like you might want to listen to him. No, listen to him. See, those familiar with the Old Testament, which the disciples definitely were, would have immediately recognized the reference, listen to him, to Deuteronomy 18:15, with the messianic prediction of a prophet greater than Moses. Okay? The people were to listen, obey, same thing, to that prophet. And when he had spoken, and when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent, and no one in those days, they didn't tell anybody in those days what they had seen. Now, as wonderful as these experiences are, they're not the basis for a consistent Christian life, are they? Experiences. Consistency, dying to self daily, taking up our cross daily, can only come through the Word of God. Experiences will come and go. Our recollection of those experiences come and go. But the Word of God is always here forever for us to fall back on. That's why the Father said, listen to him. And why Peter made the same emphasis on the Word in his report in 2 Peter. So we're good. We're still on the right slides. He said, for we did not follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For we received honor and glory from God the Father. The voice was borne to him by the majestic glory. This is my beloved Son, whom I am well pleased. We ourselves heard this very voice borne from heaven, for we were with him on that holy mountain. And we have the prophetic word more fully confirmed, to which you will do well to pay attention as a lamp shining in a dark place, until the day and morning star arises in your hearts, knowing this, first of all, that no prophecy of Scripture comes from someone's own interpretation. No prophecy was ever produced by the will of man, but men spoke from God as they were carried along by the Holy Spirit. So Peter witnessed Christ in all of his glory up on that mountain with the other two. And yet he tells us more reliable than his experience is the Word of God. We have stories, we have experiences that we share with people to tell them how great Jesus is, what he's done in our lives. People who knew Brian before would be like, whoa. People who knew me before Christ got a hold of me would be like, whoa. But more important than that is the Word of God. What does the Word of God say? I don't care what your experience is. What's his Word say? See, our own personal transfiguration comes from an inner renewal. Paul says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. That inner transfiguration in 2 Corinthians 3:18. And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of God, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Near the end of the first century, there were very few first-hand witnesses left of Jesus' life and his ministry and what went on. False teachers began to rise, and they denied his deity. They denied that he was human. They just started making up stories to fit their own political and philosophical and religious agendas. It hasn't changed much. So the aging John set out to set the story straight. And in his own words in John 20:31, he said, so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. Amen? So what's that mean? It all goes back to that question that Jesus asked, I think. Who do you say that I am? There's no middle ground there. Many try to take what they consider to be intellectually balanced position. They accept that Jesus existed. They say, yes, I accept that he was a Galilean Jew who lived and taught in the first century, that he was martyred for his teachings, and that those teachings were both radical and influential. He's a great man. But they deny miracles, and they reject any hint, any suggestion that he is God or deity. Chuck Swindoll said, divorce him of the supernatural, and we are left with a history that makes less sense, not more. Apart from the supernatural aspect of his life, Jesus was quite ordinary. And when you combine his deeds with his claims, you cannot avoid intellectual extremes and call yourself logical. You've all heard, I'm pretty sure, the Lord, liar, lunatic argument by C.S. Lewis, but this is how he words it. He said, I am trying here, I'll put it up there for you. Yeah, you can read that. I am trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him, Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say, he says. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level of a man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your own choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him. You can kill him as a demon. Or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Paul wrote this in Colossians 1:15-17. He said, He, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, for by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So it comes down to this. Who is this man? He's Jesus of Nazareth. He is God in human flesh. This is how he presented himself to the world, and in the end, this is how we must either accept him or reject him. Let's pray. God, we just thank you so much for coming down to earth, becoming a man, and beyond that, God, living that sinless life, being crucified and paying the way, your atoning blood, that we might receive you, that we have the opportunity to follow you. God, I just pray that if there's anybody here that doesn't know you, that you would just work in their heart. God, that you would just reveal yourself to them. God, also, I'm sure there's those here that have a hard time with the daily taking up our cross and dying to self daily. God, I just pray that you'd work in everybody in that respect. We can all use work on that. God, just help us to focus on you, to be Christ-centered and to be other-centered and to burn out on you. This we pray.